Well, let's talk about Donald Trump's first 100 days in office with Peter Mathews. He's a political science professor in Long Beach, California. Morning, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us. So 100 days, how do you think he's done?
Well, let's take a look. I think the one major accomplishment from his perspective is to get the Supreme Court justice nominated and ratified, approved by the Senate, who could be in power for another 50 years or 40 years and have a lot of influence. However, in the areas of, let's say, immigration, for example, the courts have tied up his executive orders on immigration. He's had problems with getting funding from Congress for the border wall or getting a commitment to build a border wall, which he promised. That's tied up. And he's had a lot of problems in other areas where he hasn't been able to get any major significant piece of legislation passed through Congress. So he's actually avoided legislation and instead worked through executive orders, which are not that strong. Executive orders are not that powerful in terms of being implemented or being legal even. So there's a real problem here in terms of him accomplishing concrete things in 100 days, but he's got more time to do things that he should do. Now here's the thing. The 100-day concept came in through President Roosevelt, when Franklin Roosevelt was able to work on fixing the Great Depression, on laying the foundations for the New Deal to get us out of the Depression. That was in that whole concept of 100 days to do that took root then because he did lay the groundwork for much of the New Deal programs that got us out of the Depression. You look at Presidents Johnson, for example, and Reagan. They were very influential presidents who got things done early on and took that momentum and became game changers in American history. But Trump has not made that mark yet, so we'll have to see what he has to do, in order to do that.
Well, the Great Depression was quite a while ago, Peter. Do you think it's still right that we judge the president on the first 100 days?
I think it should not be a very ironclad tool to judge the president because many important things can be accomplished after the 100 days is over. On the other hand, the first 100 days does give us an indication about the president's certain amount of his judgment, his values, his momentum possibilities. And so if he does not take off to a good solid start, even if it was just getting a few of the bills passed that he promised, then someone has to question whether or not he'll be able to do this later on in the rest of his term. So we can't use that as an ironclad tool to judge him. And yet it does indicate certain things about his presidency. And the presidents were able to get something done quick, within 100 days, something significant, went on to have very successful presidencies, such as Ronald Reagan and Lyndon Johnson in their own way.
Well, how is President Trump doing in the approval ratings?
I'm sorry to say, but dismal. 41% approval rating, which is the lowest of any modern-day president since President Roosevelt, who had a very high approval rating. If you look at President Obama's approval rating, if you look at President Johnson's and President Reagan's, they were in the 60% range and above. And yet, after 100 days, after 100 days, President Trump is down at 41%. But that's a solid group. Those are his voters who love what he's doing. And he is seeking to cement that because 92% or more of his voters, actually 98% who voted for him, do support him still. That's still not a majority of the people that he'll need in the next election round to get things done. And congressmen are quite likely to not support him on certain issues like the repealing and replacing Obamacare. He couldn't get enough votes for even that because members of Congress are worried about his unpopularity and maybe they could challenge him on that, some of them, even Republicans.
Okay, Peter, I want to talk to you about a few lines that are coming out of an interview that he's given to Reuters as part of this 100 days in office, marking that. And he said, quote, "There's a chance that we could end up having a major conflict with North Korea. Absolutely." I mean, how much of a chance do you think there is? Because any military action would run the risk of massive North Korean retaliation and huge casualties for Japan, South Korea, and for US forces in that area. So do you think he's right in saying that?
I'm afraid that the way things are going, this could happen, and he needs to avoid that at almost any cost by being more measured, more diplomatic, by returning to the agreed framework principles that Bill Clinton had negotiated with North Korea to keep the peace for several years. He needs to go back and learn through history that North Korea is mainly concerned about its own recognition as a nation state. They want the US to sign a peace treaty ending the Korean War with South Korea and North Korea, and they want to be recognized officially as a country on their own. The US has not done that, and unfortunately President George W. Bush put North Korea on the axis of evil. At the same time, he was, just after the regime changed and overthrew the Iraqi government, one of the members of the axis of evil. And those kinds of things are problematic. If you look at also George Bush pulling us out of the agreed framework that Clinton had us in with North Korea, all those things led to North Korea's paranoia and North Korea to feel that it needs to build at least some kind of deterrent of a possible U.S. regime change or attack. That's why I think President Trump should calm down should actually offer to negotiate directly with North Korea with no preconditions and to say to North Korea, what do you want? You want recognition? We'll go ahead and recognize you as a nation state. We'll sign the peace treaty, get the Korean War over, and we can work out economic exchanges with you and cultural exchanges, and that way we'll reduce tensions. And North Korea has those nuclear weapons. They've got about 25 nuclear weapons already built and 1,000 nuclear missiles more than likely, but they're not long-range missiles. That's what Trump is concerned about, that a long-range missile could reach California. But I'm saying that the North Koreans are not going to launch a first strike with nuclear weapons. That would be suicidal. So Trump needs to start from that premise and work on reducing the tensions and addressing North Korea's concerns as well, and not going out and, saber rattling with having aircraft carriers in their region right now.
Well, he has said in this interview that he does want to resolve the situation diplomatically. And if that were to happen, of course, the Chinese would play a huge part in that. And talking of the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, he said, quote, he is a very good man. That's a bit of a turnaround, isn't it?
It is, and it's encouraging to see that President Trump is willing to, be collaborative in that sense, at least verbally, with the Chinese president and give him some credit. But here's the point. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And so we have to see what China was able to do and will be willing to do with North Korea. China does not want the U.S. to provoke North Korea, in their estimation, into some kind of irrational act of putting up a preemptive strike or of defending themselves and worrying about that the U.S. will try to overthrow them. So China is saying to President Trump, we'll be willing to work to help North Korea reduce the tensions, but the United States has to also agree, for example, as a first step, perhaps put a moratorium on those war games that the United States and South Korea conduct every year. At the same time, North Korea could agree to stop their nuclear weapons development in exchange for that kind of stopping of the war games for now. It has to be confidence-building measures step by step. And I think as the larger and more powerful country, the United States should take the first step to ameliorating North Korea's concern. And South Korea does not want to have a war with North Korea. They don't want North Korea to attack them, even with the non-nuclear weapons, with artillery. It would devastate Seoul. And North Korea could very well do that if it felt threatened by the U.S. with regime change. So things are at a very boiling point right now and precarious, and things need to be turned down once again. Diplomacy has to work. It has to be made to work.
Okay, Peter, thank you so much. Diplomacy has to work. Peter Mathews there. Thank you.